Tom Delfit's on. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent.
How are things in Spokane?
Things are fantabulous in Spokane. You know, someone asked earlier, you know, tomorrow's Groundhog's Day, and that's really a big event here. So we're all, you know, gearing up and getting ready for that.
Good. Well, I can certainly understand.
Because, you know, how much more winter we have is of key importance to everybody here in Spokane.
Believe me, growing up there, I recognize that. So,
Hello, Taylor and Jane. Nice to see your smiling faces.
Hi.
Taylor and Jane are with a company called Toki that has a fascinating new, I don't know if you have a real term for it, but an interactive gift bag. And it has kind of a digital token on it that you can customize and make your own video gift card. And the gift bag is made out of recycled materials. So it's good for the environment.
How cool is that? Taylor and Jane, are you based in Spokane?
We are, yes. We're in the Riverwalk building right next to No Lie.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn more. You'll have to send me some info after.
Yeah, I will.
We'll send you a bag.
Yeah.
Awesome. I would love that.
And that's absolutely the purpose of these sort of forums, is to connect, you know, investors outside the area with entrepreneurs in Spokane.
So awesome, Tom.
We'll just give everybody another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Hello, Chip Overstreet.
Chip,
Hi, Tom. Hi, Brooke. How you doing?
good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Chip, you were probably at the startup weekend where a book presented back in 2012.
Yeah, indeed, I was an investor as well.
Sure was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it is 2 minutes after 12, and I like to get these things started right on time and be sensitive to everybody's schedule. And we finished right at 1 o'clock. So thanks everybody for attending today. It's a great cross section of entrepreneurs and founders that we have on the phone. I wanted to start by kind of reminding everybody the purpose of Meet the Investor, and it really is to enable local startups and emerging companies to learn and meet with and get acquainted with venture funds and angel investors from outside the area. And then on the flip side, for those investors from outside the area, to become better acquainted and familiar with the great entrepreneurs and startup companies that we have in our community. I think this is the 17th one we've done. So, you know, over the last couple of years, we've had ample opportunity to get exposure to other investors and for those firms to get to know our companies better. Meet the Investor is sponsored by Hawley Troxell. And Hawley Troxell is a law firm based in Boise that recently joined forces with Witherspoon Kelly. And Hawley Troxell is the largest law firm based in Idaho. I think with Witherspoon Kelly, they now have over 100 attorneys, 23 practice areas. And today with us are two people from Hawley Troxell, one Kim Kane, and then the other is Rick Repp, who's very familiar to everybody in Spokane. Rick is both on the boards of Ignite and also on the board of the Spokane Angel Alliance. Rick is a partner with the firm and kind of specializes in working on businesses of all sizes, from startups to public companies, and works on financings and mergers and acquisitions and other corporate matters related to businesses. And Rick, I'm just going to turn it over to you to introduce Brooke today.
All right, great. Thank you, Tom. I also want to put a shout out to a couple of my partners from our Boise office that joined. Brad Fraser and Steve Frensko, I noticed, are on the call. This is their first time, I believe, joining an Ignite Meet the Investor presentation. So I'm glad to have them here. Steve practices primarily in M&A transactions, and Brad Fraser has a tech practice. He was formerly in-house with Micron, and so he's already been a great asset to me and my clients with regard to a number of transactions that we've worked on here recently since joining forces with Hawley Troxell. So thanks for that introduction, Tom. And And it's my pleasure, Brooke, to welcome you and say welcome to our Ignite presentation. I'm very excited to hear an update from you because I was there back in the early days when you presented to the Angel Alliance. I remember your presentation to the Angel Alliance, and you brought one of your remote electronic dog feeding devices to the Angel event. And so it was exciting to see you progress and make it on Shark Tank. And then you went on to Stanford, and now you've graduated, and now you're a VC. So I just want to say welcome to Ignite. Thank you for remembering your hometown of Spokane and coming back to share with us your new adventures and accomplishments.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. And I think I just want to take a second to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. As Rick said, it's been over a decade now since I started my entrepreneurial journey with ICPooch in Spokane and left about 6 years ago. So it's just, the familiar faces, Tom and Chip and the Angel Alliance of Spokane were absolutely essential to my own entrepreneurial journey. And so it's cool having learned a lot more and being where I am now to find opportunities to re-engage with you guys.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Rick, and welcome Steve and Brad as well from Holly Troxel. Today's format is, kind of one of I'm going to moderate some questions I have for Brooke, but I really do want to make it to be interactive. So if someone has a question, I think maybe the best way is to just send it to me via chat, and then I will call on you. But really, I am hopeful that people will jump in with questions because Brooke's got a pretty interesting background, and I want to make sure that questions that might be on other people's minds that I haven't thought of get addressed. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and get started. Brooke, you don't really need a lot of introduction because many people in Spokane, particularly in the startup community, are very familiar with you. But a little bit of catch up would be good. Kind of catch us up in your activities and your journeys since graduating from high school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started IcyPooch in 2012. I was 12 years old pitching at Startup Weekend, was fortunate enough to go on that journey for the 5 years up until leaving Spokane and graduating from high school. I came down to the Bay Area where I am now in Palo Alto, California, to attend Stanford. It was my dream school for most of my life, I think because of the entrepreneurial draw and history that exists here and the people that live here. And so I was just, I love Stanford. I majored in management science and engineering, stayed really involved in entrepreneurship and business. So I was the president of Stanford Women in Business Group, did a lot of work with the Stanford Technology Ventures Program, which is kind of the entrepreneurship startup hub at Stanford. And that took me into getting a master's degree also in management science and engineering, and into the VC role that I'm in today as chief of staff at Floodgate. I'm excited to dig more into that, but that's a brief overview of what I've been up to.
So was your Stanford experience everything that you dreamed about and hoped for?
Absolutely. I think it's always different, right? Like you envision something for so long, and I don't think it always is how you expect it to be, but I think it was better in most cases. And just the opportunity to meet students with such diversity of backgrounds and interests and knowledge bases, and the opportunity to interact with amazing founders that would just come in for talks. I remember I would call my dad pretty much at least once a week freshman year. There was this class I took where every week they brought in a different founder. And so there, you have like the founder of Nextdoor and the founders of Google and like all these people coming in. And every time I was just like, Dad, I can't believe this is crazy. So really just an amazing experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, being right there in the center of kind of the, tech universe and have the opportunity to meet with those people. Great experience, and delighted it exceeded your expectations. And by the way, Brooke is referring to her father, Chris, who is on the call today. And I got to know Chris quite well over the years and formed a great friendship and a high level of respect. One of the things that you did at Stanford was you co-founded something called the Peaks Fellow Program. What was that?
Yeah, so I mentioned STVP, which is the Stanford Technology Ventures Program. And under the director of that program is a professor named Dr. Tom Byers. And I had the opportunity to develop a really close working relationship with Dr. Byers, starting out taking his classes and then moving to independent research. And something that he originally started this broader program with the idea that entrepreneurs aren't just born, but that entrepreneurship can be taught. And so he wanted to take these world-class engineers and people coming out of Stanford and give them the opportunity to have an education in entrepreneurship as well. So immediately I just thought that was awesome. And when I started working with Tom, he was launching a new program called PEAK, which stands for Principled Entrepreneurship, Action, and Knowledge. And so this was, following the time of Theranos and Uber and some of these big blow up disaster culture situations in Silicon Valley that I think a lot of us are privy to and reading about. And he wanted to take a step back and say, okay, what are we doing? A lot of these founders are coming out of Stanford or this area, and what could lead them so astray to make morally questionable decisions like this? And so he said, okay, well, let's actually build ethics and values and principles into the way that we're teaching entrepreneurship. So I got to do a little bit of research on that and ultimately ended up deciding that a great way to really focus on that type of education is to build community and allow students to have these types of exploratory discussions with one another. So with a friend of mine, Gopal Raman, we founded the Peak Fellow Program. And so every year we take 16 students and they get together throughout the summer. They're all doing different internships, whether that's at startups, they're working on their own projects, they're doing research, working in defense, like across the gamut. And we come together once a week with mentors in industry and answer questions like, what are your personal values? What are you seeing in the workplace that maybe doesn't feel right to you? What do you really appreciate? And the idea is just to start getting those wheels turning of, okay, what's actually important here? And like, how do I align my personal values with my workplace or with my career, whether, as I go on to found companies or be on the early teams of startups. So I think it's too young to be seen exactly if we're going to prevent the Theranosis of the future, but I sure hope so. And I think it's been really reassuring to hear students coming out of the program and saying, wow, this really helped me just to clarify what I stand for and what my mission and focused impact is going to be.
Well, I would love just to drill down on that separately because I've watched We Crashed, Super Pumped, and Dropout, which are documentaries or series on all three of those. And there's a real fine line between, all those personalities and some of the characteristics it takes to be uberly successful like that. So love to learn more on that, but we'll move on to the next question, which is, undoubtedly you had many opportunities or many directions you could have gone in after your Stanford education, but you chose to go into the venture industry. How did that kind of trickle to the top of the list?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really wasn't on my radar at all. And in my mind, investors were like you, Tom, so accomplished and wise and had operated and worked with countless entrepreneurs. And I didn't feel ready for that coming out of Stanford. I felt like I had a lot more to learn. So all through Stanford, I thought and was positioning myself to go work for a startup or start something if I had the right idea. And through this Stanford Technology Ventures Program, there's actually another fellowship program that I had the opportunity to do called the Mayfield Fellows Program. And Dr. Tom Byers, who I spoke of, is one of the teachers of that. And Anne Muraco, my now boss and managing partner at Floodgate, is the other teacher. And so I got to do that program. And as a fallout of that, ended up building a close relationship with Anne. And as I was getting ready to graduate, she came to me and said, we're looking to hire an associate to come onto the team, and we think that you'd be awesome. And I said, wow, that sounds like a really amazing opportunity to learn from people I really respect. And learn about new technologies and industries. And so it was really a no-brainer, because I think in that decision, the people that I get to work with was the driving factor. And I think if you surround yourself with people that have a lot of things to teach you, that you really can't go wrong. So it's lived up to that so far.
Wonderful. I had to kind of look behind me when you said accomplished and wise. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
about that, but I'll take
Oh,
the
yes.
compliment. I appreciate it. And a lot of things in life are kind of spontaneous. You don't really, know what direction you're going to go until, opportunities present themselves that look appealing. So it's actually a good transition, because a couple of the founders of Floodgate are, very well known in the venture industry, and at least a couple of them are on the annual list that Forbes puts out called the Midas list, which is, the top VCs in America. So maybe you can just kind of share the backgrounds of some of the founders of Floodgate.
Yeah, absolutely. So Anne Muraco, who I mentioned, was doing her PhD at Stanford in math modeling and info security at the time. And she was really involved in teaching entrepreneurship through the School of Engineering. And she came across this guy named Mike Maples, who had successfully founded and operated back-to-back startup IPOs. He founded Tivoli Systems and Motive. And he was involved with Stanford, kind of trying to figure out his next move. They crossed paths and thought she was going to start a cybersecurity startup. And Mike basically pitched her on this idea that, hey, what do you think about this concept called pre-seed? And at the time, right, this idea that writing a $500,000 check for less ownership into a company to get those flywheels going was pretty novel. So this is 15 years ago, and Floodgate was one of the first few VC funds ever to do pre-seed investments. And to this day, we still focus on pre-seed and seed. That's our bread and butter. We don't really go outside of that scope. But Anne Muraco has been incredibly successful in her career. I think given her PhD background, she's very academic in her approach to investing. So she comes with a lot of frameworks and ways of thinking about building a business and getting to product market fit that I haven't seen from many other investors in the Valley. And she's invested in Lyft. She invested back when it was called Zimride. It was like this van that would help college students basically travel around together and coordinate rides. She still sits on the board for Lyft post IPO. She also invested in Refinery 29, a company called Emotive. So she does a lot of marketplaces. She's recently started to invest more into healthcare, but really interesting stuff. And then Mike, on the other hand, is also quite impressive. Also a multiple time member of the Forbes Midas list, investor in Twitter, Twitch, Okta, Chegg, the textbook company. So it's really just fascinating and amazing to get to sit with and learn from these people every day and know that they've seen these incredible entrepreneurs and gotten to work with the building of these amazing companies.
What tremendous experience. Just delighted for you. You touched on what stage your firm invests at. What about, industry focus or geography or I guess the preferred investment size is kind of already self-explanatory since you're at the pre and seed stage. But what about industry focus and geography?
Yeah, so we focus in US pretty exclusively. We have a couple companies with operations in Israel, but we pretty much stay to the US because we think that that's kind of how we can, there's a lot of operational logistics around that. And then in terms of industry scope, we're generalist. But within that generalist, we really like to say that we're software powered. So we don't really invest in hardware. We invest in software first businesses because those are typically lend themselves easier to getting to venture level scale. Because we know software can scale a little bit easier than hardware can, having been a hardware founder at one point. And so that's how we think about it. And we're also, I'm not sure if now's a good time to get into this, but in our investment structure in pre-seed and seed, we're high conviction investors. And so what that looks like is we have 4 partners that write first checks into companies, but they'll only write like 2 to 3 checks each a year. So we're really only writing 10 to 12 checks as a fund every year. And when we do that, we tend to lead the round. So we write the larger checks. Our check size is 500,000 to 2.5 million. And we tend to take more ownership because of that higher investment. So that's kind of an interesting, not all early stage investors do that because, the investors on the call will know that the risk is a lot higher when you're at that stage of really it's just a founder and their idea. And so to take a bigger bet into 10 companies rather than diversifying that risk is pretty unique. But it's really just I think the consequence of that is that the partners get to work more closely with the founders that they do back and really drive that early development of the company.
Yep. So I got a little lost there. So there's a couple of partners each writing checks, and I think you threw out the number 12. Does that mean 12 companies per year or 4 partners each writing 3 checks?
Yeah. So each partner will invest in 2 to 3 companies a year. And so as a whole, that looks like 10 to 12 for Floodgate every year.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. And maybe it might be helpful because everyone views things a bit differently. In your words, describe what pre-seed is. Where are things at the pre-seed stage, and then where are things at the seed stage?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. The way that we think about it might be a little bit different, but one of our frameworks that we push on a lot of our founders and the way that we diligence companies is this idea of inflections and insights. And so you might hear it as tailwinds, et cetera. We believe that the formula for a successful business, ultimately, you have some underlying shift in the world towards a new future, whether that's a new technology like AI we're seeing right now. It could be a new regulation. The climate policy and the Inflation Reduction Act allocated a lot of new capital towards climate technologies. So these broader societal shifts are kind of create these waves that then are privy for founders to ride and allows them to exponentially scale in a way that they wouldn't otherwise. And the piece there, though, that's important is the insight. And so we are really looking at the pre-seed stage for a founder who says, hey, I have this belief about the world and an earned secret about the world that no one else has. And that can translate to founder market fit, if you think about it that way. But it's really just like, what does this founder know and believe that no one else does? And they've put in the work to basically test that hypothesis and prove that it's true. And so at the pre-seed stage, that's really what we're looking for. When you get into the seed stage, we're looking for more traction, whether that's, hey, we have these 5 people like chomping at the bit, like they're ready to sign the dotted line, do this major contract with us if it's B2B. We've started already we've reached like 90% of a college campus and are looking to expand to the next one. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme, but we look for some level and degree of traction with the company.
Okay. Did you use the word earned secret?
Yes. Yeah, I can go into that a little bit deeper.
Sure. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So I think the idea there is just there's multiple types of founders. And for a lot of founders, they might spend their career in a certain industry. And through their work and effort there, they have developed a knowledge about that space, and then they can see something that no one else sees. So for example, we invested in a company called Applied Intuition. Kasser Yunus is the CEO. They do software for autonomous vehicles. And Kasser had been in the automotive industry for a long time, and he had been going to conferences and hearing, and he basically said, hey, like, I know because of like what I've learned here that this is going to be important, but I don't think anyone else has figured this out yet. And so we say, yes, okay, like you are the person to go build that company. Let's go with that. And those are typically, it's kind of like the earned secret that we look for.
Okay, excellent. I like that. You mentioned some of the companies that the Floodgate has funded, and great companies, Twitter, Okta, Lyft, and others. How do you go about sourcing these? How do you identify these?
It's a great question. We had our annual investment strategy meeting last Friday, like all day chatting about this very question. Because I think that's always the question, is like, where are these founders living? If there's going to be 30 top founders every year, like where are they living and what do they look like and how can we go find them? So Floodgate takes a pretty diverse approach to sourcing. We have, because Anne and Mike and the other partners at Floodgate have been in the industry for a long time, they've developed a lot of relationships with other investors, other entrepreneurs, the founders that are in our portfolio. And so we will go to them oftentimes, or they'll bring companies to us that they say, hey, we think this really fits with what you guys like to look at and invest in. We think you'd be great help in this founder finding product market fit or developing their insight. So the network is one thing. And then we recently, we raised a new fund, our 7th fund. It's a little bit larger. We're at 140 million. So the team has grown a bit. So when I joined, there were also several other associates to come on. And we spend a lot of our time just doing kind of the classic sales motion, scouring LinkedIn, scouring our own networks from college, and just trying to figure out who's starting a company and who's really smart and interesting. And the last thing I'll say is that's maybe unique to us a little bit is Anne still teaches at Stanford. And there's a senior associate on the team who also did his PhD at Stanford. So we have very close ties to the university and some others, Yale and Harvard on the East Coast. And so we do a lot with young founders and students. And so that's another big place that we source our deals.
Has Floodgate ever invested in a 12-year-old founder before?
I don't think so. We had a couple pitch. It was funny, Tom. I thought of IcyPooch because this one kid, we took a pitch meeting with him. I think he was maybe like 15, but he was taking the pitch meeting from a bathroom stall in his high school. And I was like, I never did that, but it shows commitment.
Well, maybe I get the record then for investing in one of the youngest entrepreneurs in the country. What was my next question? I lost it here for a second. My question was, you're doing a lot of outbound marketing and LinkedIn searches to identify the next opportunity for Floodgate. Yeah. How frequently or how often, or if ever, do you invest in a company where someone just calls up and says, hi, Brooke Martin, I'm Tom Simpson from Spokane, and I have an idea for a new company?
It's definitely happened. It's hard because I haven't been there that long, so I haven't seen, but we get a lot of cold inbound that we all go through. So that's another big task of the associates is we have this deal flow email list and we just go through all these companies and respond and look at every single one of them. And so we take a lot of those meetings. None of those during my time have turned into an investment, but we've only done, I think, 2 investments since I've been there over the last year, at least that I've gotten to be a part of. So I think, it's definitely possible, but it's hard. And I think that if you can have, and that's my hope too of being here, right? Because if you have like that warm intro and that early mentorship, it definitely makes a difference.
Okay, we've got a question here from Kimball. Do you want to ask your question to Brooke?
I had a few. Was there one that you wanted me to ask first?
Go with your first one.
Okay. So seed rounds have exploded, and it sounds like it's the new Series A, meaning it requires product market fit, which sounds like you have been saying. There's an A to B here. What do you recommend for startups looking for product market fit? And B, where do you see the venture industry going with these trends?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And the market dynamics are really interesting, especially if you just look over the last couple of years and where we are now. I think that explosive nature is coming down quite a bit. I think in the world that we saw in 2021 and 2022 is kind of this zero interest rate investment landscape. And a lot of VCs were throwing money around and throwing large checks at, high valuations to founders without product market fit at the seed stage and earlier. I think we're coming back down to earth a little bit. So I think that you're seeing more and more that the seed is coming back to what it used to be. At least that's what we're seeing so far this year. I think for startups looking for product market fit, it's definitely what we say over and over, even to our own founders who haven't found it yet, is you want to try and stay lean until you've found it, right? And I think that that's where a lot of founders often get tripped up, and even investors, where it becomes all about the growth and the scale. And it's easy to look at numbers and say, oh, we're growing, we're doing well, we need to go raise more money, but you don't actually have product market fit. And I think that you know when you have product market fit, because it feels like someone's taking the steering wheel away from you. You just have to kind of hold on for dear life. Some founders come to us, they're like, oh, we think we have it. We're like, well, if you think you have it, you probably don't have it, because you'll know when you have it. And just the leaner you can stay, the tighter you can keep your capital deployment, and just iterate, try different experiments, stay lean and figure out what you need to do to get that right balance is kind of the best thing. And I think I answered the second question a little bit early in terms of where we're going. I think it's kind of dialing back in a bit. And then your question on how do you compete for deals with was that a separate question, or should I get into that now? How to compete for deals with other VCs?
If you want, yeah, that's
okay. Perfect.
I'm curious.
So it's definitely the competitive forces at play are interesting ones. We prefer not to compete, because when you're competing, it becomes just who has the bigger checkbook. And so then you see the Andreessens and Sequoias of the world start to win those battles. And so how we compete is by going earlier and earlier. So we try to identify the founders really before they're even out fundraising, so we can build a relationship with them, start to mentor them. And then when they're ready for their funding, we have that pre-existing relationship and are able to write the check. But typically, if we have a founder that comes to us that says, hey, we're raising a $2 million seed, we've been talking to 40 different investors, and we already have $1.5 million committed, we say, sorry, that doesn't work for us, because it's already gotten past what we're willing to pay. So I don't know if that answers your question. And we're unique in that there's certainly funds that jump in there, and the associate's job is to go find the hot deal and get the partners in to win it.
Excellent. I love what you said about product market fit, and when you're there when you can take the hands off the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Very well said. I wrote that down. I'm going to try to remember it. So once you have, as an associate, you've identified an interesting company, the partners kind of like it. Describe the due diligence process. How do you kind of take, this idea on a napkin and an interesting person that has an earned secret, and then really vet it? And how long is that process typically?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been learning more about this over the past few months as I've helped diligence a couple of deals. So what you said is, yeah, it's this person saying, hey, I have this earned secret, and you have to figure out, is that a real secret or is that just bullshit, right? We don't know. So we have to go in. I think a big thing that we're looking for is vetting the founder themselves. So we back channel, people that they've worked with, really getting a sense for, are they the type of person that can stick to a company for, 10 to 12 years and do what needs to be done to get it to venture scale. So that's kind of the founder piece is really important for us. And then when it comes to diligencing the insight or the market opportunity, it's a lot of just cold outreach, honestly, or, getting connections to people that we know in that industry. So Anne recently did an investment in a company called Rue, which is a marketplace for veterinarians. And so these founders came in and they said, hey, we've been seeing that veterinarians coming out of veterinary school have like 20 different job opportunities. Like there's a shortage of veterinarians, and animal hospitals are willing to pay to fill these empty shifts that they have. So they designed this kind of selective marketplace. And so we got on the phone with like dozens of animal hospitals, like veterinary schools, veterinarians, just saying like, hey, is this actually right? Like, is this consistent with your experience? And if, we consistently hear yes, 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 that's typically a good indicator. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
I think for us, the founder piece is definitely really important, where I think as you get to later stages where there's more shown progress, it's maybe a little bit less important. But at that stage, we're like, okay, there's nothing to show here except for who you are,
Right.
really. So we have to
Yeah.
make sure that.
Well, just like in real estate, where it's location, 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 in angel and venture investing, it's all about the people. So that's really kind of the most important thing to vet out. So when you structure investments, are you doing typical Series Seed? Are you doing convertible debt? Are you doing safes? Hopefully not. How are you typically structuring your early stage deals?
Yeah, we typically go for preferred stock in our deals. We really try and stay away from safe notes and try to explain and encourage founders not to structure their financing that way. I think with convertible notes, that can get interesting. Mike Maples maybe is the one who would do that the most out of any of our partners, because he has relationships with certain founders that maybe we know that whenever they start what they're going to start, it's going to be really awesome. And before they're ready to fundraise, Mike will just say, hey, like whenever you're ready, like this is here. But that's kind of a very rare circumstance. But I'd say 98% of the time it's preferred stock.
Okay. And that's my strong preference too.
Yeah.
It's just a lot cleaner. You set a price and everyone's interest is aligned. I can remind everybody, if you have any questions, please send them to me in the chat, and then I will direct them to Brooke. So after you have vetted the company and you've structured this, Series Seed preferred stock, how do you typically, or how does Floodgate typically then interact with its portfolio companies and its founders?
Yeah, so we, as I said earlier, because we don't write as many checks, we are high involvement in the companies that we back. And so we typically take a board seat and we work with them closely. I think so. Now I'm Anne Miraco's chief of staff, which means I basically join her for all of her meetings. And we take pretty much bi-weekly, monthly, sometimes weekly calls with her founders, depending on where they're at. In addition to board meetings and board responsibilities. And so a lot of that is like, hey, we need to hire this person. Help me think through how we do that. Who should we be talking to? A lot of it's like, hey, we're not sure about the product right now. We're not quite to product market fit. Like, what are we going to do to get there? Do we launch a new product? Do we change this one? How do we divide the resources of the team? And then of course, later on in the company's life cycle, it's okay, what's the next round of fundraising that we need to do? Let's hone that pitch. We help them build their pitch deck and practice and iterate on the right messaging. We help them through the buy side process if there's an acquisition that's going to happen. So we're really hands-on when it comes to investing, which I appreciate, having had awesome hands-on investors back in the day. I think it's a great way to have support as a founder.
So I have a question, but I'm going to ask a first question first, but it's related. You know, how many of these companies that you're backing are first-time entrepreneurs versus those that have, you know, either founded or been on the founding teams previously?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a mix. Typically we'll see there's some people that have never founded, but they've been very successful in industry. And typically those founders become B2B founders. But because they have that expertise, you know, in whatever industry they're starting the company in, typically works well. With younger founders, what we've found is the folks that have always had that entrepreneurial itch and maybe started a few companies, maybe they weren't super successful, but they just really have that entrepreneurial drive and it's core to who they are. And they've learned through failure oftentimes prior. We think they're really ripe to start something as well. So I think there's kind of two personas that we look at.
Yep.
And certainly there's the founders that have been successful, right? Like we have a network of folks that have exited companies that we just stay in touch with, and they often go on to start companies for a second or third time that we invest in as well.
I asked a question in part because you said you sometimes have bi-weekly meetings. And I've found with at least first-time entrepreneurs, if you start suggesting, hey, let's get together that regularly, there's a little bit of resistance because they go, hey, you know, I got it. I don't really need all that guidance. So there's somewhat of an art to kind of setting the DNA of more regular contact without alarming them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you say that. And I'd love to chat more and just get your insight on this. I'm certainly learning from Anne and watching how she manages those founder relationships and says, okay, no, you might not want this right now, but like maybe you need this. So it's kind of, you know, Anne has 3 kids and I see that mom mentality come out from time to time as well.
There's a lot of analogies between working with founders and working with children. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that. Sterling, you had a question.
We can't hear you, Sterling.
Oh, we can't hear you, Sterling.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I was just saying you probably get pitched, you know, constantly and your inbox is inundated. And I think you've been pitched 2 or 3 times in the chat alone. How do you vet those emails and, you know, decide who to take a meeting with?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've definitely seen some fun strategies. We've had founders show up at the office and say, I'd like to meet with like Anne Miracle or Mike Maples. And we're like, oh, I don't think you can come in, but like email us here. We'll take a look at your deck. We have had people send us things, right? Like prototypes or just like Pop-Tarts as like a care package, if you will, with their pitch deck. Kind of funky things. I still think for us, we like a traditional, like, here's our deck here. And it's nice, actually. There's a lot of tools that you can use where you can structure a lot of the information of your company in one place. And so there's like Slide Room, there's some others. You can have like your slide deck, you can have your 1-pager, you can have like your founder bios. And so the cleaner and more organized that is, and the better that your deck tells the story is great. Because I think that we do get a lot of inbound. So we look at all of them. We typically go straight into the deck and we flip through and say, okay, do we understand what's going on here? Do we understand why this person is going to be the right person? Why this idea, and why is now the right time to invest in this idea? Those are the 3 things that we're really trying to look for in that first skim. So I think that like, if you can answer those things, even just like bullets in the text of the email too, that the better. It's all about marketing.
Absolutely. What is kind of a realistic time frame from an initial investment to an exit? And do you ever ask companies what their exit strategy is? And if so, what is your preferred answer?
Yeah, those are great questions. So on the timeline, we, typically takes like a year or so to raise a fund. You spend 2 to 4 years investing that fund in different companies. And typically we're looking at 10 to 15 years to harvest and return a fund. And so that's a long time, right? Like we've had 7 funds now. I think only 2, maybe 3 of those funds have actually closed, where all the companies have exited in some capacity. And so it's a long life cycle because it takes a long time to go from idea to IPO to exit. We do ask the founders, I think typically less direct than, are you looking for an acquisition or an IPO? And more just getting a sense for what's your vision for this business? Like, why are you choosing to invest your time and talents here? And what is your desirable outcome? And we look for people who are all in, right? Like, we don't really invest if someone's like, oh yeah, I want to build technology and get acquired in a couple of years, because we want to invest in like the Lyfts and the Googles and then, all of these awesome companies that are going public, they're creating massive value in society. So, and clear, like acquisitions can be great exits as well, but we like to invest in founders that from the offset have that grander vision of world domination in the most ethical way.
Have you ever heard of David Wharton or the Tugboat Institute?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know too much about it, but I've heard it come up.
I just watched a TED Talk he did all about building companies that are evergreen, that, the exit is interesting, but you're really building them to be around forever. And I just watched it over the weekend and it's absolutely terrific, because my view on exit strategies are build a company to be a leader in the market, grow your revenues at a rate faster than the market, which implies you're taking market share away, and increase your profits every year. And if that's your goal, an exit strategy will avail itself at the right time. And I really appreciate your honesty on how long it takes, because oftentimes if you kind of walk around the valley, someone will say, hey, kind of 3 to 5 years or 5 to 7 years. In my experience, that's not really the case. To really build from inception at the early stage a company that really is an industry leader takes 7, 10, 15 years. So I appreciate your honesty. I want to circle back to kind of IcyPooch now. We've talked a lot about your fund, and I know Rick Rep, you kind of had a question along those lines.
Yes, thanks, Tom. So Brooke, one of the last news articles I saw about you and your experience was an article that came out in the Spokane Journal of Business last June about whatever happened to ICPooch and Brooke, and it mentioned that you'd graduated from Stanford, and it had this comment in there. It was a quote from you saying that your lesson learned, you would have needed to redesign the technology, and you did your best to connect existing customers with a competitor with a similar product. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm curious how much of this idea that there were competitors out there, whether or not your IP was protected with a patent that protected you from those competitors, and or what you learned, that if you were sitting there on the VC side of the table and a younger a version of yourself came in and pitched this idea to you now, what did you learn from your experience that you would coach that new entrepreneur with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Rick. So to clarify the quote, I think, so we ended up having to shut down IcyPooch because we had outsourced a part of the technology to a third-party company, and we had designed the app around that. And that company ended up ceasing to support that technology that we were utilizing in our product. And so we had to shut down. And then, there were some competing forces in the market that we said, hey, for our existing customers. I mean, it was so terrible. And I don't know, it was probably different, me experiencing it as a high school senior than Tom and Chip and my dad. But having to say, I'm so sorry to all my customers, and this isn't going to function anymore, but we'll do our best to get you a similar product moving forward. But on that broader question of, what would I tell myself? What would I maybe think about differently? it's interesting. Back then, we heard from our lawyers that IP is so important, right? And I remember we went and sat down and they said, well, does anyone know about this yet? And we said, well, yeah, like we pitched it at Startup Weekend. It's, been in the journal of business, whatever we were at that point. And they said, okay, well, we gotta file this patent ASAP. Now we don't really think as much, and maybe it's different for hardware, certainly biotech companies, but in software, we don't really worry about the IP as much. It's really about, can you build a really solid standalone business? And so if I would have gone back, I think that the upfront investment in developing that technology ourselves would have prevented us from being in the situation where we were reliant on someone else for the functionality of our product, and maybe focusing on that over, trying to figure out what this original hardware IP was. Because I don't know, at least in the software realm, it's not exactly apples to apples, but you're not like, the chances that you're going to go head to head with Google in an IP battle is like kind of slim. And so you really want to focus on and growing and building that just all in one platform or company. So I think that's a big takeaway for me, is just kind of what's important. And yeah, it's hard it was definitely a learning experience though. And I think everyone goes about it differently.
Talk a bit about your Shark Tank experience. Why did you choose to go down that path? What was the application process like? What was it like being on there? And under what circumstances would you recommend someone else present on Shark Tank?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember this, Tom, but we didn't apply to be on Shark Tank. I mean, I was like Shark Tank's biggest fan. We would watch it every Friday when they released a new episode. But they had come across IcyPooch in the media elsewhere and reached out and said, hey, we want you to be on the show. So we had to apply and I think, send in materials and maybe like a pitch video or something. But we kind of had this expedited door opened for us to be on the show. And it was, a crazy experience, right? Like to start, they make you sign a stack of papers, like maybe half my height, kind of signing away your life, like all the privacy. You can't tell anyone you're going on the show until it's like aired and like you're on live TV. So I was, we were going down to film in Southern California and they said, you can't tell your mom where you're going. You can't tell your teachers. I was like, this is crazy. So definitely a very locked down process. I think it's so interesting because to this day, it's like the number one thing that comes up, right? It's not like, oh, she had a company. It's, oh, she was on Shark Tank. And so it has this level of credibility that's truly amazing. And so we didn't end up taking an investment from the Sharks. To be honest, it was a bit of a traumatizing experience as a 14-year-old. Having to go in there and kind of take a lot of these made for reality television comments that the investors throw in.
And they weren't very nice, were they?
They weren't. I mean, yeah, between us friends on this call, they threatened my dog. They were quite rude, especially to a younger Brooke.
Yeah.
But I think now any other interview is like a piece of cake after that one. So feel grateful for that, just being thrown into the deep end. And I think it's funny, it's definitely a bonding note whenever I meet people. In fact, the other day I took a pitch with a couple folks and the guy goes, oh, like I was on Shark Tank too. So we had this bonding moment. We sent each other videos afterwards on what we did on Shark Tank. So it's definitely a unique experience. And like I said, the credibility piece is, I think, one of the most valuable parts to being on the show. And certainly if you end up getting investment, I've known several entrepreneurs that have been on the show and partnered with the Sharks that have done incredibly well. shout out to Me and the Bees Lemonade. My friend Michaela Ulmer was on my same episode, and Damon invested. They're still going strong. So I think it can be an awesome thing. Certainly very different than venture capital, very different than raising angel funding. It's definitely made for television, but it can be a blast. So I think I don't know that I would seek it out as your first option, but if the opportunity presents itself, or you think it would be great for publicity for the kind of company you're building, I say go for it.
Yeah, I think it's great for publicity. We recently had another company in Spokane called Square Keg that has developed a Square Keg. And they were on it, and the impact of the halo effect of that show has been tremendous, and that's definitely a benefit. Steve McDonald, you had a question as Economic Development Director of Spokane.
Yeah, you can kind of figure where this is coming from. So, Brooke, now that you have experience at Stanford and Floodgate and in Silicon Valley, kind of looking back towards Spokane, what do you recommend that we focus on here in order to help support and expand our, startup culture and ecosystem here?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and something I've thought a lot about. I think to start, Spokane is amazing, and in hindsight, I think that the Spokane entrepreneurial ecosystem is one of a kind. And I feel so fortunate to have grown up in the community that Spokane has. I think just the authentic support, knowledge sharing opportunities that are created in the ecosystem are phenomenal. I mean, opportunities like Startup Weekend, the work of the Spokane Angel Alliance, Tom and Ignite Northwest. I think that things like this are also amazing, because the one fear is that it becomes too siloed, right? And it's hard at the end of the day. I've been to a lot of places, and I think that nowhere really can replicate what Silicon Valley is. And there's kind of this stronghold of, you have Sand Hill Road and all the investors are within like a couple miles of each other. And you have Google right next to Facebook, right next to Apple, right next to Tesla. And there's just this magic that comes from the proximity of what's happening here that I think it's important to tap into. So I guess my recommendation, I think exercises like this are awesome to try and get visibility, both, as you said earlier, Tom, for the entrepreneurs in Spokane, to other entrepreneurs and investors in the Bay Area. In addition to just, I think learning from what's going on. Something I've learned during my time here, during my 6 years in Palo Alto, more or less, is I think news or like trends spread a lot faster. So there's value in trying to keep a pulse on what people are hearing who are here, because I've noticed that I often will hear things, before my dad does, who lives in Seattle now. And so it's just kind of ways that you can facilitate that knowledge sharing across geographies. As crazy as it sounds, I think it does make a big difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just a couple more minutes here. So if anybody has a last minute question, let me know. But so when you're not VCing, what else are you doing these days, Brooke?
I've been moving today. I was living up in San Francisco and just came back down to Palo Alto, but I love to run. I think the California weather is pretty amazing. I've gone soft on Spokane winters. I know, Tom, you were talking about Groundhog Day. I remember that and being a big deal when I was growing up. Like, okay, is it going to keep snowing? Is it going to get warm? But it's pretty sunny and warm here most of the time. So I love to go on runs and hikes. And I've also really enjoyed traveling when I can. So I had the opportunity last year to actually live in Florence, Italy for 3 months. I was teaching with Dr. Byers, who I mentioned earlier from Stanford. We were teaching a class with the founder of Nextdoor, Nirav Talia, on entrepreneurship in the Renaissance. And so what I was talking about with Spokane, Silicon Valley, Florence was like this hub of innovation in the Renaissance period. So it was really cool to spend time living there and just digging into history and comparing it to today in terms of what can we learn about what creates the right environment for innovation.
Well, sounds
So
like
those
you're
are, I say travel, running, sleeping, because I'm tired.
any half marathons or marathons?
Yeah, I've done a few half marathons. I'm hoping to do my first marathon this year, maybe in Paris. We'll see.
Wonderful. And we have a question from Taylor Hoyt. Taylor, fire away.
Hey, we were just wondering, what are the things that you're seeing that are signs that there's any improvement on the whole? Only 2% of VC funds go to women-run companies. Are there, I've seen, I think TechCrunch reported that that's going backwards, and it has for Black-owned companies as well. I mean, I don't know if there's anything you can think of that all of us can do, but are there any green shoots you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and a personal passion of mine. Anne Miraco is actually one of the founders of a group called All Raise. I think ultimately the problem is that VC still is not diverse. You see partners that are primarily white men that are doing the investing. And so, at Floodgate, we have 2 of our 4 partners are females. 3 of our 4 associates are also females. And so we're trying to really, I think the more that we can get female representation in venture capital or investor positions, the more we'll see investment into female and minority company. And, same goes for other minorities. So I'm hopeful. And I think I would recommend, if you haven't read Brotopia, it's kind of a discouraging read, but it's a good one just for visibility on the history of all of this. But would love to chat more about that with you, because I think it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Excellent. Well, one last question. A lot of people who you grow up in Spokane and go to college and work elsewhere, oftentimes return back to Spokane in their late 20s or 30s or something like that. They all say they never will, but 10 years down the road, they show up again in Spokane. We ever going to see Brooke Martin back in Spokane?
I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I miss Spokane a lot. I haven't visited for a few years because my family has since moved away from Spokane. But I was telling my dad I really miss Senior Froggy. I love the quesadillas. But yeah, I think it's such an amazing place to grow up, and I love the opportunity to be here with you all today, because I think it's just Spokane has such an amazing community for startups. And I know, Chip and Spiceology and some of these amazing companies coming out of Spokane are just so inspiring. So one day I'd love to start a company and have it based in Spokane.
Well, that would be wonderful. Well, thank you, Brooke. This has been, not only informative, but really fun. It's been fun to catch up with you, and really been fun to kind of see, how you've thrived and succeeded since 2012 when we first met. So thank you very, very much. And Cindy, did you want to give a plug for one of our upcoming events?
Yes, hold on. I do. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we have the Ignite 25+5 awards coming up. I will go ahead and put the link to register in the chat, but it's a celebration of the top 25 emerging companies in the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, and Sandpoint region, as well as the top 5 to watch. Some of them might be on this call, hard to say. But anyway, go ahead and register, and I'll put that in the chat.
It's a very fun event. It's at the Barrister in the evening. And, when we first came up with this, we were wondering if we could even find kind of 25 really compelling, fast growing companies. And, over the years, we found that it's hard to choose. There's so many of them. So really a fun event, and it's great to celebrate the companies in the area. Well, with that, Brooke, thank you very much. Thanks everyone else for attending. And we'll be doing our next one, I think, on April 12th or 19th. So thanks, everyone. And happy Groundhog Day tomorrow.
Thank you all. So great.
Great job, Brooke.
Thanks, Chip.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you. And sorry for those I didn't. I'm looking through chat and I'm screenshotting so I can reach out to you afterwards.
Hope your move goes well.
Thank you. It's been a crazy, was not expected.